Wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for tuning in once again. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. We got 50 people here. We're going to get started. We're going to go ahead and continue in our series, False Chronology. Get back into the book, The Issue with Chronology by Anatoly Fomenko. We're going to read a chapter today. This is not a long video. Again, we're here fighting a little cold, but we good. That ain't going to stop me from bringing more content to you guys and keep the research going. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you very much for that. Let me know if the music is too loud or not loud at all. You guys can hear me, right? Check, check, mic check. 1, 1, 1. 1, 1, 1. Can I get a 1? Yeah. Just want to make sure I'm not just talking to myself here. Wow. Wow. Make sure you guys are safe out there. All right. Nice. Thank you guys. Thanks for confirming. So, before we begin today, guys, I just want to dedicate this video in honor of Kimberly Benson. May you rest in power, rest in peace. Kimberly Benson. I promised her son I would dedicate my next video to her. And that's what I'm doing right now. In her memory, in her honor. Why am I doing this? So real quick. Going to go to my last video and go to the comment section real quick, guys. Just want you to see. Urban Engine 2564 says, my mom just passed and she loved your videos and was a loyal subscriber. Thanks for your service. You know, guys, I responded. Let me just show you what I said. I said, so sorry for your loss. It hit me when you said she loved my videos. May she rest in power. Now she's with us in spirit guiding, I believe. Stay strong, family. I literally got teary-eyed. I'm not kidding, guys. I would love to dedicate a video in her honor. So I asked him for her name or YouTube name, if he was comfortable. And he responded, wow, thank you so much. And I know she would have loved that. She introduced me to your brilliant work in 2020. And she still was watching you up to her last days of life. Her name was Kimberly Benson, and she's truly missed. I don't know her YouTube name, but he knows her email. So, and she was on my Patreon too. I didn't even, I appreciate you for reaching back out in your support, family. So, I told him I'm going to honor her, right? And again, this hit me a little bit because, at first when I was reading, I was, I kind of like sad, and just started thinking about my mom and, just so you guys know, in case you guys don't know, like, there is a language barrier with my mom. She don't really, she don't watch my videos. I do try to explain this stuff to her in Spanish, and my mom's very old school, guys. She's in her 70s, and it's kind of hard to get her, to remove her her old indoctrinated hijacks. She's very religious. She grew up very Catholic, and it's just hard. So what I'm trying to say is, that's why I got teary-eyed because, here we got somebody telling me his mom actually watched me, followed me, brought her son into it. And if your mom is like that, be very thankful, guys, and honor her. And that must be awesome to be able to learn with your mom and your parents and, not have this kind of like thing in between you that, because, how when people are religious, they get stuck on these indoctrinations and it's kind of hard to pull them out. And then it's like they see you with a bad eye because now you're blaspheming right now because you're not believing, what they believe. So I just felt like, wow, so I wanted to honor her here before I begin. So again, rest in peace, Kimberly Benson. We know you're watching now, guiding all of us. And thank you for the support and love you provided while you were here. I really, truly appreciate it. Thank you very much. And shout out to Urban Engine and hang on, brother. I know it's tough. May Allah fill you with strength and love and blessings the rest of your days. So again, we're going back to our series, False Chronology. I have a playlist, guys. If you're new to this information, we've gone over so much good information in this series. We're reading two great books. Today, we're going to continue one of them. So if you guys are new, if you want to catch from the beginning, just go to my playlist tab, search for the False Chronology playlist I created, and you'll see all these videos right here. We've gone over some good information, all right? Oh, wow. So again, we're in the book, The Issue with Chronology by Anatoly Fomenko. And today we're going to continue chapter 13 of this book. Again, we're just going to read chapter 13. Shouldn't be here too long. All right. I hope you guys enjoy it. And it says here, the foundations of archaeological methods have been based on the Scaligerian chronology from the very beginning. And if you guys don't know, our modern chronology that we go off is based off of like 2 or 3 people, mainly 2. All right. And this is one of them, Josephus Scaliger. It's funny how his name is Josephus, right? How much of the pesos involved with this? We're soon to find out. We'll see. But he was one of the hijacks. These are the people, you know, duplicating and fabricating and creating phantoms throughout history and chronology. And that's just what they give us and teach us in school. And it's literally a lie, guys. They add 1,000 years here, 300 years here, 1,500 years here, you know, and we're not really living on the right timelines. And a lot of people and civilizations, empires have been duplicated. So that's basically the idea if you're new to this. Shout out to Drop. He was the first person to put me onto Fomenko. And on part one, we went over who Fomenko is and all his credentials. So go ahead and check it out. A lot of people try to talk bad. You know, we're not talking about, again, we don't follow one person. We just follow the info, right? So it says here, how come there was no battle? The results of excavations conducted by the Swiss anthropologist George Glowacki in Italy proved sensational. The scientists discovered that there was no military action conducted in the area where the troops of Hannibal had allegedly defeated the Roman legions in the Battle of Cannes. A study of the barrows showed that the remains belonged to the victims of the 13th century plague epidemic and not to Roman soldiers. Listen, as everyone was accustomed to thinking. And this was Sovetskaya Rossiya back in November 28, 1984. And it says here 13.1, the ambiguity of archaeological dating and their dependence on the existing chronology. The reader may inquire about the state of affairs concerning other methods of dating, historical sources, and artifacts used nowadays. Modern archaeologists speak of the ignorant diggers of the previous centuries in painted tones, since many artifacts have become defaced and search for valuables. The archaeologists count A. S. Uvarov excavated 7,729 mounds in the Vladimir Suzdal area. Listen, mounds in Europe, right? I believe this is in Russia or somewhere over there. A.S. Spinson has the following to say about it. When the items found in the excavations of 1851 and 1854 came to the disposal of the Rum-Jantsev Museum, they were a chaotic pile of materials with no markings whatsoever, and no one can tell which mound this or the other object had belonged to. The grandiose excavations of 1851 to 1854 shall be mourned by the scientists for years to come. Nowadays, the excavation methods are a lot more advanced. However, applying them to ancient excavations is an impossibility since these have already been conducted by the diggers, in parentheses, of the past. The basics of archaeological dating methods are as follows. The best way of deducing the age of a given European culture is finding out which Egyptian dynasty this European tribe traded with. Huh. When we talk about real ancient Egypt, you guys already know, talking about ancient America, not the false one. The findings of Mycenae made Greek vessels in the Egyptian mounds of the 18th and 19th dynasties allow the archaeologists to consider the dynasty and the culture as contemporaries. Similar vessels are found later on in Mycenae or Mycene, together with a particular kind of pin that is later also found in Germany near some urns. Now, before I continue, just a reminder, the Mycenae, so-called Greeks, a lot of Danites there involved, a lot of other Israelite tribes, such as Judah as well, involved in those areas, the Aegean, Mycenaean, the Danans. We've already went over this, right? Not people from Japhet only. A similar urn is found near Fangr, together with a different kind of pin, which resembles the one found in Sweden, in the so-called barrow of King Bjorn, which can thus be dated as a contemporary of the 18th, 19th Egyptian dynasties. However, it turns out that King Bjorn's barrow could not have belonged to Bjorn, king of the Vikings, a well-known medieval character, since it predates his time by about 2 millennia. Firstly, one fails to understand what criteria or similarity have been used here. Secondly, and a lot more importantly, all of these methods are heavily dependent on the priori dating of the ancient Egyptian pharaoh dynasties. This method, which is also known as the dominoes method, and all similar ones are based on pure, unadulterated subjectivism and principally on Scaligerian chronology. Newly found artifacts such as vessels are compared to similar findings dated in accordance with the consensual chronology. The alteration of the chronological scale automatically alters the chronology of the new archaeological findings. An erroneous chronology completely invalidates all such methods. So all that gets thrown out the door because it's a false chronology. It is little wonder that the archaeologists investing their trust in such methods are constantly confronted with bizarre facts. It appears that in certain remote parts of Europe, one encounters the coexistence of things whose prototypes in the East are separated from each other by centuries. Furthermore, L.S. Klein firmly denies all connections between King Bjorn's barrow and the medieval Bjorn king of the Vikings. This method tells us only that Bjorn's barrow is contemporary to the 18th and 19th Egyptian dynasties. It tells us nothing about the possible datings of these actual reigns, which may well be medieval, along with Bjorn the Viking. The first schemes of Egyptian chronology were based on the work of Manetho, who had compiled the list of the pharaohs, allegedly in the 3rd century BC, allegedly, and grouped them into 30 dynasties, having added up all the years of reigns and assuming that their reigns have all been consecutive, the figures he got proved formidable. Flinders Petrie, L. Borchardt, and other Egyptologists had estimated that the duration of the history of ancient Egypt to equal 5,000–6,000 years. This is how the long chronology of Egypt was born, the one that had been prevalent for a long time. E. Mayer and his followers had developed the so-called short chronology as an alternative. The problem is that the pharaohs and their entire dynasties often reigned simultaneously as co-rulers in different parts of the country. Manetho was making the assumption that the state had been a monolithic one under a single ruler, and so he had lined all the pharaohs into a sequence and thus considerably extended the entire history of the state. You guys hear that? So a lot of the ancient pharaohs are supposed to be ruling at the same time, but what did they do? They actually separated them and put them in chronological order, like they were coming right after each other, which what happened extended that history longer than it was supposed to. We should add that the short chronology of Egypt is still way too long and should really have been called a slightly shorter chronology. As we have already mentioned in reference to the data provided by the Egyptologist Heinrich Brooks, the so-called short chronology is also based on ethereal foundations. We learned that its creator, E. Mayer, has based his deductions on the annual records and entries referring to memorable events made by the pharaohs themselves. However, this chain of knowledge has reached us as separate links with many gaps and distortions. This is why attaching the archaeological material to the Egyptian scale does not solve the problem of absolute, or indeed even relative, dating. It says here, 13.2, the excavations of Pompeii, the dating of this town's destruction. The excavations of the ancient town of Pompeii are a perfect illustration to the problems that arise in the dating of archaeological materials. First and foremost, it isn't clear which year's eruption destroyed it. All right, you hear this? It's not even a real, solid history. Apparently, the 15th century author Jacopo Sannazaro wrote, "We were approaching the town Pompeii and could already see its towers, houses, theaters, and temples untouched by the centuries." It is assumed, however, that the town of Pompeii has got destroyed and completely buried after the eruption of 79 AD. So it shouldn't be there in the 15th century. Listen, this is why the archaeologists have to interpret Sannazaro in the following manner. In the 15th century, some of the buildings of Pompeii were already emerging from the debris. That's how they try to explain it. It is thus assumed that Pompeii had been covered by a thick layer of earth, since the ruins of the town were only found in 1748, and the discovery was purely accidental. Herculaneum was discovered in 1711. Nowadays, the history of the discovery of Pompeii is related after the documented recollections of that epoch as follows. During the construction of the canal on the river Sarno, 1594 to 1600, the ruins of an ancient town were found. Nobody had the merest notion it might be Pompeii. Methodical scientific excavations were started as late as 1860 by Giuseppe Fiorelli. However, his method of work was far from the usual scientific standards. The excavations were indeed conducted in a barbaric manner. Nowadays, it is hard to estimate the damage done by the sheer vandalism of that time. If somebody thought a picture or a figurine wasn't artful enough or visually pleasing, it would become destroyed and thrown away as trash. Sculpture fragments had been sold as souvenirs, often as statuettes of saints. Some of these Christian forgeries may have been medieval originals that did not fit the Scaligerian chronology, and hence wound up sold as souvenirs instead of becoming part of a museum's collection. If one's cogitation is to be confined within the paradigm of the Scaligerian chronology, the artistic level of the artifacts found in Pompeii is very high indeed, be it frescoes, inlays, or statues. The state of science is also deemed advanced enough to correspond to that of Renaissance epoch. All right, Renaissance. One of the findings was a sundial with uniform hourly divisions, which were considered a high level of precision even towards the end of the Middle Ages. The finding was analyzed by N.A. Morozov. An ancient picture of a part of such a device that had been found on a villa near the town of Pompeii can be seen in figure 1.47. All right, and this is what they're talking about right here. So remember, Pompeii is supposed to be destroyed 79 AD. None of this should be linking to medieval times or, 15th century, 16th century, 17th century at all. It says here, ancient mural from Bosco Reali villa near Pompeii. We can distinctively see a terrestrial globe shown in an approximate perspective. The object was also related to the sundial, right? Okay, guys, are you having blurry visions? It shouldn't be blurry. It might just be you, Mississippi Slab. Let me know, guys, if you guys can see the screen clearly. Please. Let me know, guys, before I continue. Just what? Just as blurry, just as fine. Let me know, guys. Just want to make sure I don't want to continue. It's good. We see it well. Okay. So Mississippi Slab is your internet. B. Klasowski wrote that a set of surgical instruments has been discovered that is all the more noteworthy since some of the items have been previously supposed to belong to the modern times, discovered and introduced by the scientific avant-garde of the operative medicine. All right. So guys, if you see anybody also say they can't hear or they can't see, just help me out and answer for me so I don't have to stop reading. All right. Just pay attention to chat moderators and see if anybody has any questions. Thank you. Some of the graffiti art found on the walls of Pompeii is clearly medieval in its origin. All right. Again, some of the graffiti art found on the walls of Pompeii is clearly medieval in its origin. For instance, the picture of a hooded henchman, page 161, figure 148, we see a medieval henchman that drags his victim, a man in a cape, onto a scaffold with a rope. V. Klasowski tells us this is a copy from a drawing made on plaster with some sharp object. Another drawing that is definitely worthy of our attention is that of a medieval warrior wearing a helmet with a visor. These two drawings are but a small part of the Pompeii graffiti or Pompeian graffiti that is explicitly medieval in its content. One should mark the illustrations that one sees on page 44, and that's later on in the figures here. Nowadays, we are told that it portrays ancient gladiators. That's what they tell people. However, what we see is clearly a medieval knight with a visor on his helmet. This is well-known military equipment of the Middle Ages. So again, here's the figure. They're saying a picture found at a Pompeian wall. We see a hooded medieval henchman dragging a caped figure by a rope onto a wooden scaffold. And then down here, 1.49, a picture of a medieval knight wearing a helmet with a visor found in ancient Pompeii. All right. So I guess these are some examples. So it says figure 1.5, pictures of the Nero epic painted on the wall of an ancient Pompeian residence. Listen, this is from Pompeii, looking like medieval. Look, guys. And nobody ever thought to question this, and we just fell for it, right? We just believed everything they tell us in school, right? But this is painted in the walls of a Pompeian residence. The ancient gladiators are depicted as medieval knights here. So they're supposed to be gladiators, right? That's how they try to disregard it, right? Oh, don't worry about it. Yeah, they look like medieval people. These are ancient gladiators. But they're depicted as medieval knights. One can clearly see helmets with visors, which were invented in the Middle Ages. V. Klasowski sums up his general impression of the excavations of Pompeii as follows. I have been amazed many a time to find that ancient Pompeii artifacts often prove to be spitting images of the objects of a much later epoch. All right. So many people have already quoted this, studied this, and told others, not just Anatoly. We also find out that according to Klasowski, many of the famous Pompeian inlays bear an amazing resemblance to the medieval frescoes of Raphael and Giulio Romano in composition, coloring, and style. To put it simply, they look like medieval frescoes. An example of such an inlay can be seen in figure 1.5. This is assumed to be the ancient battle of Alexander the Great and the Persian king Darius on the right. The inlay was discovered in 1831 and is now in the domain of the National Museum in Naples. All right. Now look at this, guys. Figure 1.5, an ancient Pompeian inlay showing the Battle of Alexander and Darius at Isa. So when was Alexander really living? All right. B. Klasowski's comments runs as follows. On the floor of the triclinium, one sees the famous mosaic from colored stone, which now crowns the collection of the museums in Naples. The coloring and the technique are unparalleled. The composition may well be compared to the best works of Raphael and Giulio Romano. It is most remarkable indeed that there should be a resemblance between the work of the anonymous ancient artist and Raphael's battle between Constantine and Maxentius. In style and the composition of the main group, certain decorations of the Roman Thermae of Titus bear amazing resemblance to some of Raphael's frescoes as well. The Scaligerian history, as followed by Klasowski, tries to convince us that all these works of ancient art were created in the 1st century AD, the latest, and have remained buried until very recently, when the excavations of Pompeii finally began. Raphael, Giulio Romano, and other artists of the Renaissance are supposed to have created paintings strongly resembling these ancient originals, in parentheses, without even having seen them. All of this is highly suspicious. The hypothesis that we put forward is as follows. All right, listen to what he's saying. Pompeii is a medieval town of the Renaissance epoch. It's not ancient, it's not classical. They've been lying to us, guys. It has been destroyed by one of the relatively recent eruptions of the Vesuvius. The ancient Pompeii artists were contemporaries of Raphael and Giulio Romano, hence the stylistic resemblances or semblances. Pompeii might have been destroyed and buried by ashes during the well-known eruption of the Vesuvius that occurred in 1500. There was a major explosion of the Vesuvius volcano in that time, guys. Or even by the eruption of 1631. We're talking about recently. We're talking about ancient. Most of the Pompeian graffiti cannot be used for dating purposes, such as quotidian announcements, slang, etc. However, some of the inscriptions explicitly contradict the Scaligerian chronology. One of them can be found in 389 and was translated by N.A. Morozov as follows. The hunt and the decorations of Valentis Nero, Augustus the Holy, son of the Holy D. Lucretius, Valentis the Immanent, the 28th of March. We run into a contradiction between the Scaligerian history and actual inscriptions discovered as a result of excavations. An emperor with the double name of Valentis Nero is mentioned here, whereas in Scaligerian chronology, these names belong to two different emperors, separated by about 300 years. A longer version of the same ancient announcements, referring to the pageants of 6 to 12 April, can be seen in number 73 or figure 1.52. The translation offered by V. Fyodorova separates Nero from Valentis, as we have expected. We had no opportunity of checking the authority of both translations. All right, so figure 1.52, ancient gladiators wearing medieval helmets with visors. Okay, Pompeii artwork, close-up of a fragment. All right, you guys see? Artifacts of the Christian epoch have been found in the ancient town of Herculaneum. In figure 1.53, for instance, one can see a Christian chapel discovered during the excavations of Herculaneum. Not supposed to be any Christian anything during that time, guys, with a large cross on the wall. All right, so something's going on here with Pompeii and Herculaneum. All right, so here you go. Figure 1.53, a rare picture of a Christian tabernacle unearthed in the ancient Herculaneum, Italy. Continuing, 13.3. The allegedly accelerated destruction of the ancient monuments. The archaeologists of the 20th century have noticed a rather odd tendency. The overwhelming majority of the ancient monuments report deterioration in their condition that allegedly started 200 or 300 years ago, from the moment their study began, in other words, and has become more intense than during the preceding centuries and even millennia. The examples are widely known. The theater of Epidaurus, Parthenon, the Colosseum, the palaces of Venice, etc. Here's another example in the form of an article from the I Vestigia newspaper, 31 of October, 1981. A Sphinx in peril, the famous figure of the El Giza Sphinx in Egypt, has stood steadfast for 5 millennia. However, pollution has afflicted it terribly. A large piece of the sculpture, a paw, has fallen off. The reasons for this are as follows: high humidity, salty ground, and primarily the accumulation of sewage around the Sphinx that isn't filtered in any way at all. It is nevertheless supposed to have stood for 5,000 years without any problems whatsoever. This condition of deterioration is usually explained by the negative effect of modern industry. However, as far as we know, there has been no quantitative research conducted to this day as to whether or not modern industry afflicts ancient constructions made of stone. One logically assumes all these buildings to be a lot more recent than what the Scaliger chronology tells us. They are subject to erosion and have a constant natural destruction rate, which is rather high. All right, so he's pointing out some here that don't make sense. These are questions we never ask. We're not really in tune to even know what to ask, right? Because we just believe and we don't know, we're like, oh, yeah, they're saying it's classical, it must be classical. How do we prove them wrong? It says here 13.4. When did the construction of the Cologne Cathedral really begin? Uh-oh, for you mud flood, old world, architect, enthusiasts and researchers, right? This is part of it right here. This goes in with that. We already know, right? They tell us that these buildings are, oh, it was built in the 1700s, 1600s, 1800s. They might be a lot older, or vice versa, as they're telling you here. They might be a lot sooner. Nowadays, we are being told that the construction of the famous Cologne Cathedral carried on for several centuries. It is assumed that the construction began in the 4th century. After that, the cathedral has allegedly been rebuilt many times, and nothing remained from the original cathedrals whatsoever. That's what they tell people. The construction of the Gothic cathedral is supposed to have commenced in 1248. Some sources even mention the exact date as 15 August 1248. It is further assumed that the construction was finished for the most part by the 16th century. So you see how many, we're talking about hundreds of years here, it took them to build just one building. Does that make sense to you guys? Circa 1560. We're talking about what, 300-400 years it took them to build a cathedral? This is what they tell people. After that, this gigantic medieval cathedral has allegedly undergone minor renovations, but by and large, its shape remained unaltered. All right, and here's the cathedral. All right. Okay, hey guys, yeah, make sure to take out any trolls, hide them right away if they say something really dumb. We don't got time for that. We're not little kids here. We're all grown people, and we are researching real history. We're not just saying an entertainment, a channel. We're really trying to learn here. So thank you, moderators, for that. So here's the image again. It says 1.54, the Cologne Cathedral, as it is today, Cologne, Germany. And again, we're dedicating this to Kimberly Benson, so honor and respect. Thank you. How valid is this point of view? When was the cathedral that we can see today really constructed, huh? When was it really constructed? Is the construction that we see truly medieval, dating from the 13th to 16th century for the most part? In figure 1.55, we can see a schematic drawing from a technical brochure that demonstrates which parts of the cathedral are medieval and which ones were built over the last 2 centuries. The full name of the brochure is Gefahrfurtern Hullner, and it keeps going. The Dome of the Cologne in Danger, graphic documents on weathering. It was originally addressed to professionals specializing in the preservation and restoration of stone constructions. It was printed in Cologne and can be obtained inside the cathedral. All right. So this is what he's talking about, what they tell people. And it says the most important masonry layers of the Cologne Cathedral And here's a little breakdown. I know this part is a little blurry. All right. Again, this is this book and all his, we're gonna read all his 20 books. This is just book one. All this is on my Patreon for my Patreon supporters. You guys want to go ahead and check it out. If you can't find it on Patreon, let me know in Patreon. Sending me a message directly from Patreon and I'll help you find it. So as you guys can see, it says uh Thrasher bells erode slowly, medium and endangerment rate. Then two, uh low endangerment rate, three, sandstone, four, and you guys see limestone or okay, so it says 1.55, the chronology of the Cologne Cathedral masonry, taken from the technical brochure titled The Danger to the Cologne Cathedral, an illustrated documentary of the erosion. Excerpt from the illustrated textbook on the Cologne Cathedral by Professor Dr. Arnold Wolff. We obtained the brochure in the Cologne Cathedral, and number one is supposed to be again from 1200s to 1560, number two from 1800. So they didn't start remodeling again after it was supposedly finished first time until the 1800s, right? According to the scheme, the oldest part of the masonry, that which belongs to the year 1248, 1560, is represented by horizontal shading. The rest, shown by seven other kinds of shading, such as diagonal, dotted, etc., was constructed a lot later, after 1826. Amazingly enough, the oldest part of the masonry, horizontal shading, amounts to a small part of the modern edifice. Really, it only covers half of the cathedral's foundation, and even this small medieval fragment is not whole, since it consists of two parts that are pretty distant from each other. The rest of the masonry, that is, the major part of the entire modern edifice, only appeared in the early 19th, 19th century. The absence of masonry dating to 1560 to 1825 is particularly suspicious, and that's what I was saying. How come they didn't build between all those years? Does it mean that there were no works at all conducted in 250 years? Or that they did not affect the structure of the cathedral in any way worthy of mentioning? What German historians and architects are telling us in this manner is that the cathedral that we see today was essentially built in the 19th century. By what criteria does Scaligerian history call it a medieval cathedral in that case? Someone might say that despite the fact that the cathedral was built in the 19th century, it should still faithfully represent the medieval original that has stood there ever since the 13th century. We would like to ask about the groundwork for this hypothesis. Are there any genuine medieval graphical representations of the Cologne Cathedral before the 17th century? Apparently, there are none. The same brochure by Arnold Wolff contains an engraved dated 1834 to 1836 that depicts the cathedral pretty much the way it is nowadays. The album contains what appears to be the oldest picture of the cathedral on page 21, dating from 1809. We consider all this to mean that the construction of the cathedral in its present form has only commenced in the 19th century or 1800s, which is proven by the masonry scheme as shown above. The cathedral was built between 1825 and 1835 for the most part, and the engraving dating from 1834 to 1836 reflected the final stages of the cathedral's construction. There were renovations done in the 19th to 20th century, but no major changes, all right? So what I'm like kind of like picturing is that a lot of parts in Europe and other parts of the world, apart from America, they're trying to make them older, right? When they were more recent. And you know what they do to the ones in America, right? They try to make them more recent when they were much older, right? Because see, in Europe, they did have, uh, it wasn't just ox and cars, over there, they were supposed to have been building, right? Since the first century AD, all these magnificent buildings, right? Mhm. There were some traces of an ancient building on the site of the modern cathedral, since some mysterious masonry dating from 1248 to 1560 is present on the scheme. However, this very scheme explicitly tells us that this medieval masonry was used as building material for the 19th century construction. Let us study figure 1.55 yet again. The lower part of the left tower is made of stones dating from the 19th century, laced with layers dating from the 13th to 16th century. The upper part of this tower is construction of the 19th century, and the same is true for the other tower. The old medieval building that had stood on the place of the modern cathedral was deconstructed in the 19th century. Its masonry used as construction material for the new edifice. We would like to pose the following question to the historians and the archaeologists. All right. Hey, much love, James. Appreciate you, man. Thank you. Everybody check out James' channel. He's on the chat. Just donate it. You got a lot to say if you're interested in hearing. So these are the questions they want to ask historians and archaeologists. 1. Are there any genuine medieval pictures of either the Cologne Cathedral or its predecessor that had existed before the 16th century? Does the modern Cologne Cathedral bear any resemblance to the medieval cathedral that had stood on the same site before the 18th and 19th century? Our hypothesis is that if there has really been a cathedral here, it was significantly different from the modern one, a great deal smaller for one thing. Hey, much love, Millennials. Appreciate you. Thank you. Number 3. Why are there no traces of masonry dating to the period between 1560 and 1825? In the walls of the modern Cologne Cathedral, doesn't this mean that the construction really commenced in the 19th century on the spot that had been previously occupied by a building of smaller proportions dating from the 13th to 16th century? One should also question the reasons for dating, one should also question the reasons for dating the old masonry to the 13th and 16th century. These stones may well belong to the 17th and 18th century. Another inquiry that we find worthy of making concerns the methods used by modern archaeologists for dating masonry fragments. How can they be certain that a given stone, was used for the construction of the cathedral wall in the year that they consider to be the correct dating and not some other? We conclude with a general observation concerning the unnatural, prolonged construction of many historical buildings of medieval Europe. According to Scaligerian history, they were built very slowly indeed, for centuries on end. The Strasbourg Cathedral is a perfect example. It used to be the tallest building in Europe. We are now being told that its construction began in 1015 and ended as late as 1275. That makes 260 years. The Erwin von Steinbach Tower allegedly took 162 years to build. The historian Cole Rauch makes the logical conclusion that the entire edifice of the cathedral took 424 years to build. You guys hear that? Why would it take so long? Almost half a millennium. Colerush also couldn't have missed the unnatural, procrastinated construction of the Cologne Cathedral. Apparently realizing the necessity of explaining such unnatural extended terms, he offers the following as a theory. The Cologne Cathedral, whose construction began in 1248 and lasted for 250 years, such tardiness can be explained by the fact that its stones bear a great amount of artwork. As we are beginning to understand, artwork has got absolutely nothing to do with the matter at hand. It is erroneous Scaligerian chronology that has arbitrarily extended the construction period into several centuries. 13.5. Archaeological methods are most often based on Scaligerian datings. This is what they're going off. The modern methods of archaeological dating rely on the Scaligerian chronology to a great extent and may often lead the researcher to great errors. which are blatantly obvious in some cases. Let us give a few examples. The excavation of a barrow that was dated with absolute certainty to the epoch of Kiev Russia, the alleged 9th to 12th century, according to the archaeological method, occurred relatively recently. However, 19th century coins were found in the same barrow. Listen, come on now. Among the bones, 19th century coins. This is mentioned in the article by Byelorussian historian Saikovsky, published in 1997 in the 12th issue of the Almanac of History and Archaeology on page 83. It is clear that the coins could not have made their way into the barrow by chance. Is there an explanation? As a matter of fact, there is, and a simple one at that. The ancient barrow belongs to the 19th century, and there is nothing surprising about it, since the pagan church, also known as Romish, had existed in Russia and Belarusia until the 20th century, complete with specific burial rites. The center of the Romish church had been in the Byelorussian village of Romy. In the 19th century, it had possessed an archbishop, more than 100 parishes, and a special language used by priests in sacraments. There is a 19th century volume containing a detailed description of this old Russian pagan church. Another example, a different barrow is being excavated, and the archaeologists make another perfectly certain dating that ascribes it to the Bronze Age. The ground under the barrow had been virgin until the hole that preceded the barrow had been dug. Some 18th century ceramics were found in this hole. It could only have got there during the burial. There's no other way, guys. Listen, I know a lot of you want these buildings to be a lot older, a lot of you mud flood people, but again, they've been trying to make certain places older than they were, and places in America more recent than they actually were. You gotta understand, they gotta go with their fake chronologies and fake history, making the true old world over there when it's not. It was over here. So where were we? Okay, this is yet another case of archaeologists using scientific methods for the dating of 18th century mound to the Bronze Age, or the time when the rather inexperienced humanity could not have fathomed the intricacies of iron metallurgy. But the 18th century was a period when both iron and steel were already known quite well. Sorry, guys. This barrel only got dated to the Bronze Age since it hadn't contained any steel or iron items. In the cases described, the barrels contained objects that contradicted their initial datings. If there are no such objects, the archaeologists date the barrels scientifically to times immemorial. The very method of archaeological dating appears extremely flawed and wholly dependent on the priori known Scaligerian chronology. Continuing, 13.6. One of the numerous problems of the Scaligerian history, the problem of bronze manufacture before the discovery of tin. Many chemists and metallurgists have been reporting the following peculiar circumstance for quite a while, namely that no bronze could possibly be manufactured in the Scaligerian ancient Bronze Age. Professor Michele Guia, a prominent and versatile specialist in organic synthesis as well as the chemistry of explosives and plastics. From the cover annotation, the author of an in-depth work titled The History of Chemistry writes the following, basing his logical construction on Scaligerian chronology naturally. He says, copper, And where were they getting all this? Remember where all the copper was, right? Michigan, right? Where was the true Bronze Age going on, guys? It was the most pure copper in the world, right? Copper had been known from the prehistoric times, not just in its free state, but also as bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. During the prehistoric epoch known as Bronze Age, bronze was used for the manufacture of various utensils, jewelry, weapons, etc. However, the issue of ancient tin metallurgy remains extremely nebulous. Metallic tin had not been known in the Bronze Age. Nevertheless, it must have been used for the manufacture of bronze. All we can do is assume that a metal of a higher fusibility was manufactured as a result of fusing copper with some minerals rich in tin content. Thus, copper was discovered earlier than tin, whose metallurgy is a lot more complex. However, the fact that bronze was discovered earlier than tin does not clarify numerous other problems of ancient history. And that's a chemist expert, guys. The picture is perfectly clear. As we can see, the fact that tin metallurgy is more complex than that of copper is common knowledge. Hence, bronze, being a fusion of copper and tin, must have appeared after the discovery of the latter. Scaligerian history has it the other way around. Bronze is supposed to have been discovered before tin in the Bronze Age. This contradiction inherent in Scaligerian chronology can be explained by the fact that the chronologers of that school were neither chemists nor metallurgists. How were they to know that the compilation of a history textbook requires that the description of the discovery of tin should precede that of the invention of bronze? However, the historians of the 17th and 18th century were driven by altogether different considerations, neither caring much for tin, nor indeed for science itself. None of them would consider consulting with a chemist. As a result, ancient Greek heroes happily hack at each other with bronze swords that need tin for their manufacture, which had not yet been discovered in that epoch. But guess where they had all that? In the Americas, they did. Modern chemists are naturally confused by such historical tableaux and are earnestly questioning the reasons for the existence of such oddities in Scaligerian history of chemistry and metallurgy. Our explanation is very simple. The Bronze Age falls within the epoch of the 14th and 16th century, and they're talking about the Bronze Age in Europe, when tin had already been discovered, after copper, of course. Consider the allegedly ancient bronze idols from Luristan currently in the Louvre possessions. Michel Guilleau cites them as examples of ancient bronze art. However, these artful Bronze Age figurines were most probably made in the 15th and 17th century. All right? That's the hijack. Hey guys, yeah, if I pause for a while, it's because, I got a cold, so I got to, do certain things. I just don't want you guys to hear that. So it says here, the bronze idols from Luristan, allegedly extremely ancient, kept in the Louvre in Paris. These artifacts most probably date from a much more recent period. The same applies to the ancient bronze girandole that has received the dating of 5th century BC, also from the Louvre's collection that we see in figure 1.57. It may well be an item made in the 16th or 18th century. All right. So here it is again, 1.57, a bronze figurine, presumably very old, dated to the 5th century BC. This scone most probably belongs to a much more recent age, namely the 16th or 18th century. All right. Let me see here, guys. Hold up. Let me see. Okay, we're gonna read chapter 14, guys, real quick. Let me just get in some water here, real quick. 1 second. All right, so we continue in the book, The Issue with Chronology by Anatoly Fomenko. This is book 1 of his 20-book series. And we go on to chapter 14. It says here the problems and deficiencies of Dendrochronology and several other dating methods. 14.1. The consequent scale of the dendrochronological datings does not extend further back in time than the 10th century AD. Okay? The dendrochronological method is one of the modern dating methods claiming to be capable of dating historical artifacts independently. It is based on the assumption that the yearly growth of tree rings is uneven. Annual ring thickness rates are supposed to be roughly similar for the trees of the same kind that grow in similar conditions. In order to make this method fit for actual dating, one has to construct a reference scale of annual ring thickness for trees of a particular kind for a historical period of sufficient length. Let us call this graph a dendrochronological scale. If such a scale is constructed, it might aid one in the attempt at dating archaeological findings containing wooden pieces. One has to determine the timber type, saw off a sample, measure the thickness of rings, build a diagram, and try to find out whether it concurs with any part of the reference scale. One should also consider the question of what deviations of compared diagrams can be ignored safely. However, the European dendrochronological scales only reaches several centuries back in time, which does not allow for the dating of ancient constructions. All right? And it quotes here, many European scientists have started to experiment with the dendrochronological method. However, obtaining results appeared a very complex task. The oldest trees in the European forest are only 300 to 400 years old. Listen. Who got older trees? What is the oldest tree in the world, guys? One of the oldest is in Joshua's Park, isn't it, in California? Deciduous trees have vaguely defined rings, which are hard to study and most reluctant to tell the researcher anything about the past. Quality archaeological material proved extremely scarce against all expectations. American dendrochronology is in better conditions. Listen, it's I didn't know he was going to say that. I was just saying that. Since it is based on Douglas fir, mountain pine, and yellow pine, Oh, we're talking about the real cedars of God. We're talking about real trees, real old. Yeah, sequoia, there you go. Gopher, where does it grow? Where does gopher grow? Come on now. However, this region is far away from the zone of ancient history. Listen, but there ain't supposed to be no ancient history in America, right? Everything's supposed to be happening in Europe and Asia and everywhere else, right? That's what he's saying right here. However, this region is far away from the zone of ancient history in parentheses. Furthermore, there's always a large number of ignored factors, such as the weather conditions for the period in question, soil quality, humidity level fluctuation for the area in question, its geography, and so on. All of them affect the growth rate of the ring significantly. It is most important that the creation of dendrochronological scales was based on the existing Scaligerian chronology. Thus, any alteration of the chronology of documents should automatically alter these scales, whose independence is thus greatly compromised. It appears that the dendrochronological scales for Europe and Asia, listen, only reach several centuries back from our age. We shall give a more detailed account of the contemporary state of such scales for Italy, the Balkans, Greece, and Turkey. Let us refer to a diagram of dendrochronological dating scales for those countries that reflects the state of affairs in this area as of spring 1994, and that will be on figure 1.58. This diagram was kindly provided by Professor Y.M. Kabanov from Moscow. He took part in a conference in 1994 where the American professor Peter Ian Huniholm made a report on the modern state of dendrochronology, presenting this rather noteworthy diagram that has been compiled in the Malcolm and Caroline Wiener Laboratory for Asian and Near Eastern Dendrochronology, Cornell University, Ithaca, New York. All right. So here's the diagram or the graph he's talking about. You guys take a look at it. Yeah, you guys see how they're saying 5 woods here, 29 medieval, 20 ancient, and so on. You see different parts of Europe over there and the Mediterranean going towards Asia. And here's another graph. Go ahead and take a look at it. You guys like. Says the modern conditions of the dendrochronological scales, one can observe that they are considered to extend until the latest 10th century AD. Uninterrupted, the scale pertinent to earlier epochs is merely an assortment of unrelated fragments. In figure 1.58, we can see fragments of dendrochronological scales for different kinds of timber, oak, box, cedar, pine, juniper, and conifers in general. All of these scales have a very obvious gap around 1000 AD. Thus, none of them can be continued without intervals further back in time than the 10th century AD. All of the earlier fragments of dendrochronological scales, as shown on the diagram, cannot be used for independent datings, since their attachment to the time axis is wholly dependent on the Scaligerian chronology, which had served as a basis for the dating of several individual ancient pieces of wood. So Scaliger, him and his Jesuit, connections. A piece of wood found in a pharaoh's tomb thus gets the dating of some distant millennium before Christ due to the historical considerations, in parentheses, based on the Scaligerian chronology. After that, other ancient, in parentheses, pieces of wood are linked to that one that has already been dated. These attempts occasionally succeeded, which results in the construction of a fragment of the dendrochronological scale around the first piece of wood. Relative datings of ancient findings within this fragment may be correct. However, their absolute dating, that is, the placement of this fragment on the time axis, is wrong. The reason is that the first dating was based on the erroneous Scaligerian chronology. So this is what he was saying earlier. Because we know that's a false chronology, all that stuff gets thrown out the window because you were basing it, that was your foundation. That was their foundation they were using this whole time. Let us return to the basics of the dendrochronological methods. In theory, the dendrochronological scale is supposed to grow, beginning with the current period and extending into the past. This implies the collation of ring thickness scales of different specimens. What is the principle of this collation? A modern source gives an in-depth analysis of the problem on page 341. It turns out that the method used is a combination of mathematical statistical methods and visual subjective assessments. Hence, the boundary between dated and undated dendrochronological scales becomes very vague. The book tells us rather frankly that if we can find a collation position whose diagrams concur with those of the traditional chronology to the best of our certainty and knowledge, the new specimen is considered dated. If we fail to discover such a collation position, the specimen remains undated. Although even in this case, a dendrochronologist can point out one or more collation methods whose concurrence is good, but not perfect in his opinion. Needless to say, the Dendrochronological Society has to agree on what is to consider or be considered perfect concurrence. Dendrochronology is thus affected by subjectivity and arbitrariness. Different dendrochronological datings have different veracity. The veracity of dendrochronological datings depends on the certainty of the collation on the dendrochronological scale. Dubious collations cast a shade of ambiguity over the entire scale. The book uses a special term for referring to such datings, namely the gray zone, with white zone referring to certain datings and the black one to the total absence of datings of any kind. The recently published book by Christian Bloss and Hans Ulrich Niemitz subjects the dendrochronological method to some very sharp criticisms that leave no stone unturned. Okay? And we continue. 14.2. Sedimentary layer datings. The methods of radium, uranium, and radium actinium analysis. The Scaligerian chronology implicitly or explicitly affects the scale graduations of methods, even the raw physical ones supposed to give the absolute age of objects. A. Olinikov tells us that over the 18th century, that have passed since the time of the Roman invasion, in reference to the territory of the modern Savoy, the weathering processes have created a 3 mm erosion layer on the walls near the quarry's entrance. Comparing the thickness of this 1800-year-old layer, according to the Scaligerian chronology, to the 35 cm erosion crust that covers the glacier polished hills, leads us one to believe that the Ice Age left these latitudes about 216,000 years ago. It leads us to believe. The proponents of this method have been well aware of the difficulty of obtaining a referential scale for something like erosion speed. It differs for various climates. The same type of rock erodes at various speeds in the tropics and beyond the Arctic Circle. Erosion speed also depends on the temperature, humidity, rainfall, and sunshine. This means that every biospheric zone requires the compilation of special scales and diagrams. Besides, one cannot be certain in that the weather conditions have remained unaltered since the exposure of the layer that we're interested in. There were many attempts of deducing absolute age by the speed of sedimentary layer formations. They didn't lead anywhere, which is perfectly understandable. Olenikov tells further that the research in this direction has been conducted by the scientists of many countries. However, the results failed to meet the expectations. It became apparent that similar types of rock erode at different rates, even under similar conditions, and establish an irregular pattern of these processes is hardly possible at all. For instance, ancient documents, a reference to the Scaliger chronology yet again. All right, all these ancient documents are based on Scaliger chronology. Tells us that the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II reigned over 3,000 years ago. Dodge the hijack. The buildings that were constructed in his lifetime are now covered by a 3-meter layer of sand. This means that about a meter of sand accumulated every millennium. At the same time, certain areas of Europe have a millenarian rate of 3 centimeters of sediment, whereas to the first in the south of the Ukraine, this is an annual rate. So it don't make sense. The development of other methods was attempted as well. The radium, uranium, and radium actinium methods are valid for the time intervals of 300,000 years. They are convenient for dating of geological formations when the required precision does not exceed 4 or 10,000 years. However, this isn't precise enough for the ends of historical chronology and cannot contribute to it in any substantial manner at all. All right? At all. And I told you guys it's going to be a quick video. It wasn't that quick, hour and a half, but trying to make them short so people can actually sit through them. And again, feeling a little under the weather. I'm feeling a lot better than I did. It's been like a lot of days. It just, this one hit me hard. I don't know what they sprayed me with, but I'm gonna go ahead and end it here. I'm gonna go rest. We're gonna come back to this book very soon. I won't take so long like I did. But you guys see what he's trying to say. If you watch the previous videos, you see where he's going with all this. And we're almost done with this first book. We only got a couple chapters left after this. All right. So basically, as DJ P is saying, all made up. It's all based on this one guy's chronology. All based on what this one guy's chronology. All right. Again, we were reading the series History, Fiction, or Science. The first book of this series, The Issue with Chronology, by Anatoly Fomenko. All right. Anatoly Fomenko. All right. So once again, guys, I'm going to go ahead and give you your time back today. I hope you guys enjoyed the little reading today real quick. Again, this video was dedicated to Kimberly Benson in her honor. May she rest in power. May she rest in peace. And stay strong, Injun. All right. Stay strong, brother. Or sister. I don't know the sex. Sorry. Thank you guys for tuning in. Yeah, blessings to Mr. Benson or Mrs. Benson. Thank you for tuning in, guys. I know this was a quick one. I know you guys want me to keep reading, but you know, I gotta break it into parts or else it gets too long and people won't sit through it, unfortunately. I got people telling me, why don't you make videos 30 minutes or 20 minutes or less? You would get more subscribers. And I tell these people right away, you're in the wrong channel. Go to those channels that entertain you for 20 minutes and don't really teach you anything. All they do is make you think and not know details and specifics. Once again, appreciate everybody that tuned in the live chat. all my moderators. Shout out to all the new patrons I got, any new channel members. I went live earlier and it was only for my members. If you guys missed it, I was showing my well maintenance. I have a well here and we were doing a little maintenance work on it. So I went live. I was showing people and I showed my yard a little bit. We had a little private moment with the members. So if you're a member, you haven't seen it, check it out. You know, again, want to be doing that a lot, doing a lot of private videos for the members, you know, because it gets personal and we don't want no trolls there. That's why. And don't worry, I'm not really reading or anything. It's just more personal videos, you know. All right. I also want to say before I go, you know, I'm going to pray for you guys. You know, anybody in the Southeast right now, may Hawa bless and protect you for this hurricane that's coming. A lot of rain's coming your way, guys. A lot of wind and rain especially. Inland flash floods are expected all the way up to Atlanta. Don't think just because you're not in the coast that you might be okay. I'm not saying something really bad is gonna happen. I'm just saying be prepared. But may Hawa protect and bless you. I pray to Hawa to take care of all the real good people out there. All right. And you know, you might lose electricity. So this is why I want to say this. You might lose electricity for a couple hours, a couple days. You don't know how bad it's gonna be. But if you depend on electricity for living or health reasons, make sure you are prepared for that and you have a backup. All right. So blessings and protections to all of you in the Southeast right now, in US, for that hurricane they're throwing at you. We don't know. We don't know if they're the ones, you know, but blessings and protections to each and one of you over there. All right. Let me see. Well, here we're gonna go out with a good brother Olmec 12 beat clockwork, because this is like clockwork. Even though I may be feeling under the weather, you guys saw I didn't stop. And it's been almost since last Thursday. This is how long this is. It's been it's weird. It's weird because I almost had like, you know, I never really get sick, and I never really go out. So it's either in the air or in the water they're putting it. You know, that's just my theory, okay? But hey, I heard things. I heard things when COVID was out. I heard things. So don't worry, I stay strong, guys. Taking the natural medicine, trying to rest up, all right? But again, this is like clockwork. This is like clockwork, all right? We're going out with the beat clockwork by a good brother, Olmec 12. He's in the chat. Let him know. We appreciate his music and for him sharing his beats with me and for the cause and everything, right? Thank you, thank you. Again, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Wow.